Press Club. I'm Jen Judson. I'm the land warfare reporter at Defense News, and I'm vice president of the National Press Club. For today, tomorrow, however, I expect to be elected president of the Press Club. So these are exciting times for me, and I'm glad to share them with all of you. So today's event is sponsored by the club's Press Freedom Team, which is a combined effort of the NPC and the National Press Club's Journalism Institute. I'm really happy to get an early start on my year as president in the area of press freedom, and in the case of Austin Tice. As most of you know, Austin was taken hostage in Syria in 2012 while reporting there for McClatchy and the Washington Post, as well as other news organizations. Over the years, there have been many days or weeks where we felt there was progress and urgency for the case. Indeed, we're in one of those periods now, as our guests will explain. We at the Press Club feel a special bond to Austin Tice. We carry him in our hearts. In just the past year, we have established the Freedom Clock in our lobby, which gives a real-time countdown, so all people coming to the club to attend events will see him and think about his time being held and how he must be freed. Also this year, we've established a change.org petition that has been signed by nearly 150,000 people, calling for the Biden administration to prioritize Austin's release from Syria. And as part of the Washington Post Press Freedom Partnership, we have helped support an amazing ad campaign running in the Post that calls on the Biden administration to meet with the Tices and calls on the president to engage, and we think this is really beginning to pay off. And in November, we launched a virtual run for Austin that had participants from 25 states and 4 countries running for Austin and sharing their stories on social media. The clock, the petition, the ad campaign, and the run are just some of the ways we have supported the efforts to free Austin and to keep a light on his case. And we will do more. We are so pleased that Debra Tice, Austin's mom, is with us today. She has been in Washington this week to have meetings on Austin's case and to join us here. Also with Debra is Christophe Deloire. Christophe is the Secretary General at Reporters Without Borders, one of the world's foremost press freedom organizations. Christophe, who is based in Paris, is here to participate in the Summit for Democracy. We are so pleased to host this conversation between them about democracy, press freedom, and the case of Austin Tice. After their conversation, they will take questions from you, and I will return to call on you and moderate. For now, please welcome Debra Tice and Christophe Deloire to the National Press Club.
So, do you want to start, Christophe?
Oh, yeah, sure. Just a few words to say that this is a crucial week for journalism. We are Wednesday? No, we are Thursday.
Today's Thursday.
Today is Thursday, sorry.
Yes.
And tomorrow, in Oslo, Norway, the Nobel Peace Prize will be awarded to 2 journalists, Maher Issa and Dmitry Muratov.
And he's getting the Nobel, right?
The Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah.
So through them, this is a Nobel Peace Prize for journalism. And this is a very positive sign and a strong message about the importance of journalism for many, many reasons, but especially to get peace in countries. And this is what the Nobel Peace Committee said in its statement when the award was announced on October 8th. And we have the Summit for Democracy. And no need to explain the connection between journalism and democracy. There were some thinkers, even they said, democracy is journalism.
Right.
And you know that
Yes.
Walter Lippmann, the famous journalist and essayist, said in the 20s of the past century, of course, that strictly speaking, the crisis of the Western democracy was a crisis of journalism. So this week is a really week for mobilization for journalism. And the fact that one journalist can be held as an hostage for 9 years is something that all journalists everywhere, all people who do believe in the right to information, which is a right of everybody, should not accept. And we have to be mobilized for this. And so I would just start by saying that we are with you, Debra, and you know this from the beginning.
Yes, of course,
And
from
we
the
did
beginning.
organize things together. But as this is a conversation and not an interview from myself, but I will maybe, or do you want to make a few, some things, and then I will, I suggest, if you agree, that I comment a bit the hostage policy in the US, the hostage policy doctrine in the past few years, its evolution, and where it should lead us with this administration.
Okay, that sounds good. So one of the things that I really wanted to talk about today is I think that it's been a while since I was here, since we had a press conference, and I feel like there needs to be some updating on exactly what's been happening in Austin's case. And at the very end of the Trump administration, finally, in September of 2020, Roger Carsten, the Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs, and Kash Patel, who was in the National Security Council, went to Damascus to meet with the Syrian government. Technically, it wasn't about Austin, but when you go with the title of Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs, the Syrians knew why Roger was there. And so the conversation did include Austin, and the Syrians made 3 asks, and they were reasonable asks, and Roger and Kash came back, and there was no action, and the way that the asks were committed to the president, to the White House, was, all of everything in these 3 items. So in November, when COVID was rampant, I was back in DC to push again, to make corrections, and the Secretary General of Lebanon, Abbas Ibrahim, who has taken a keen personal interest in securing Austin's release, he's worked very hard for Austin, actually came to the United States hoping to meet with President Trump to clarify the message from the meeting in September that had been miscommunicated to the White House. But all of this happened in November 2020 after the presidential election. And so this city was in chaos, and I was not able to get a meeting with the president at that time. And so everything just went silent until long after January 6th and long after the inauguration on January 20th. And so I did have a phone call in March, but I was finally back in the city in April, pushing, you can't let this go, and especially since even though Kash Patel left with the former administration, Roger Carsten is still the Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs. And so I was pushing that you can't drop this ball. We've had an ask from the Syrians. We've got to continue forward on that. There have been some more meetings, but there has been no progress. The meetings are what I would call friendly chats, but they're not productive for Austin. And so since October 25th or so, I have spent 5 weeks in this city, away from my family, working to try to keep pushing. I have such a strong feeling that when I'm on my way to the airport to go home, everything about Austin kind of gets a little bit shoved to the side of the desk, which is really challenging for me. I don't think it's particularly true, but I definitely feel that way. So last night there was a great meeting at the French ambassador's home with Reporters Without Borders, people that are passionate about journalists and journalist freedoms, and trying to come up with what can we do for Austin now. And my feeling about, more than ever, the time now is critical for Austin. And I think doors are opening a bit, and we need to shove those doors open and pull Austin out right now. It's critical.
Absolutely. Yesterday it was a benefit dinner for Reporters Without Borders in the residence of the French ambassador, and the audience was, of course, totally fascinated by your own efforts and what you now embody. And I would like really to take this opportunity to commend your efforts. We've done press conferences in Lebanon, in Beirut together. You came to Paris, so and to see that you are able to run this fight for 9 years, that's really, really impressive. And let's do our best so that it doesn't last longer. You didn't mention something, which is, I think, important, is that yesterday, Secretary Blinken tweeted about Austin.
Thank you, Christophe.
And I think we can interpret it as a good sign. That could be the evidence that there will be an amplification of the US efforts to get Austin released.
And that's a good point, because I do believe that may be the first time that Secretary Blinken mentioned Austin's name publicly. And I had a meeting, a Zoom meeting with Secretary Blinken in April. And he said, you know, green lighting, whatever it takes to bring Austin home. So Secretary Blinken has been fully supportive. That was just a few days after he was confirmed that we had that meeting. So he's all in. The hurdle I'm having is the White House. President Biden, I met President Biden half a decade ago. Sorry, half a decade ago in the White House. And I never would have expected that I would still be here, Austin would still be detained in Syria, and now he is in the position to bring Austin home. And we have not been able to get a meeting with him. He has never said Austin's name publicly. And, you know, I wonder if he's allowed himself to forget about Austin. I don't have any indication otherwise.
But that's really important that the name of Austin was publicly quoted by Secretary Blinken exactly for the day 0 of the Summit for Democracy. And I think that's a good sign,
yes,
and a sort of commitment.
Yes, I agree. And I think we
and that's how we can interpret it.
Yeah, I think it helps us to say, you know, the entire administration needs to get behind that. And Blinken can take the lead, you know?
And you referred to the fact that you met half a decade ago with Joe Biden. Something was important under the Obama administration, which was the hostage policy review. Because as we know, in the past, there was a doctrine regarding hostages in the US, I mean, about US hostages, of course, which was, that's not the topic or of the authorities themselves. Up to the families, to the media outlets, employers, or to insurance companies to work on it. And we know that Diane Foley, for instance, what she experienced, the fact that she was directly contacted by ISIS, and that she was like sent messages by the FBI in that period. If you negotiate or give $1 to get your son released, you can be prosecuted. So it was very important, and Reporters Without Borders played a role in this, that there was a stage policy review, and now that the doctrine has been amended under the Obama administration, and that it's an evolution for the US. And it was done under Obama, so we have all reasons to believe that now with the Biden administration, this progress will be really implemented concretely.
Right, and that's where I met him, was on the day that Obama was signing those documents. The families that had been participating in creating that new policy the president met with all of us before he went in to sign the documents, and Vice President Biden was with him. And we had about almost 2 hours of a conversation with the two of them. So I certainly remember that.
And hopefully they will remember too.
Exactly, yeah.
Just to say that we at Reporters Without Borders, so as you mentioned, we are based in Paris, but we have offices in 14 cities around the world and correspondent in 130 countries. We do work as concretely as possible. We do not just name and shame, and we do our best to support your efforts, and we will continue and even amplify this, since, as you mentioned, this is a crucial moment, and we have to take advantage of this crucial moment.
Right. You know, these came from RSF.
Oh.
You guys were the ones that printed them. So yeah, you guys have been there, really the first. You were the very first ones to reach out to us.
And I remember that it was another evolution of another doctrine, but you mentioned the Washington Post Press Freedom Partnership. But for Austin, and I think it was new in that moment, we had a huge campaign about him with 250 newspapers publishing pages about him. So there is also a need to keep this commitment of the journalistic community in the US for him.
Well, and that's, I know that I make it difficult for you guys as journalists because I'm not updating you constantly, but I would also ask you to consider that I'm not your only source. And if you're here in DC, you know, bother the State Department, ask to be in the National Security Council, ask to talk to the president. Whenever you have a press conference, you know, be like President Trump was. He would be in a meeting about anything and just kind of tune in and say, what are you going to tell me about Austin Tice? So you journalists can do that too. If you are having a meeting with a United States government person that should be committed to Austin, just pop out of context and ask about him, because I'm not your only source. And I do think it's important to continue to raise Austin's case and remind people that he's still waiting to come home. He still wants to walk free. He still has all his dreams that he is now 10 years behind on. And so he's got a lot of catching up to do.
Debra, before we open the floor to questions, do you want to add something?
Like what are you?
I don't know. So maybe we can open the floor to questions, and then you will. But one final point before we do this, just to summarize that we at RSF, we have absolutely no legitimacy to comment or try to influence the US foreign policy. This is absolutely not our intention. What we just request, and this is a call today, is that they prioritize the release of Austin in their actions. And find ways can be found. And that's really what we expect from this administration. And the name of Austin was quoted yesterday for the first time. And so from now on, we do consider that this is really a sort of restart.
Well,
There has to be one.
thank you for mentioning foreign policy, because I can say this, not as RSF, is you guys know that since 2011, the United States has not had a defined foreign policy towards Syria. And yet, discussions about Austin tend to get wrapped into affecting our policy towards Syria. And when I push in and say, well, let me look over the policy and see how we're impacting it, there's no response because we don't have a defined policy. And what I've begun to realize recently, and I may be a slow learner, is that Austin is smothering in this excuse of we can't do it because of our foreign policy. You can do it because there isn't a foreign policy, so just figure out what Austin needs as a human being aside from policy, do that thing, and then continue to scratch your head about what you're going to do about Syria writ large. Austin is not Syria writ large. He is an American citizen that needs his government to step in and do what they know is necessary to bring him home. And then they can, worry about settling the dust afterwards. And I really admire the French method of getting people home. You get them home right away, and then you sort out what the repercussions may be while they get back to their lives. And I think that we should consider that process.
This French logic, which you mentioned, is that it is a responsibility of the government to get French hostages released.
Because they're French. No other reason. It's the same with Austin. His government should bring him home because he's an American, full stop.
And what we experience in France is that there is a strong solidarity toward hostages, are they journalists or not, from the government and from the whole society.
Right, exactly.
I'm not the organizer, so
Thank you so much. That was a really great discussion. And now we have some questions, I'm sure, but I'd like to start with the first one, if that's okay. Listening to your conversation about the meeting that was held in the fall of 2020 in Syria, it sounded like it was a crucial moment in the case, but then somewhat fizzled out upon the return to the U.S. Do you see any near-term potential to rekindle the negotiations there?
Do we see any, say it again, Jen?
A potential to rekindle negotiations there. Can you hear me through my mask? Do you see potential to rekindle negotiations based off that conversation in Syria in the near term?
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
Can you elaborate a little? Is that potential meetings that are coming up or anything like that?
Well, I believe that after General Ibrahim was in D.C., those asks were publicized, weren't they? Can someone help me out here? I think they were.
Public record, it was reported.
Right. And so the things they were asking for are things that are eventually going to have to happen, right? Because things are changing rapidly, and so they're just the normal process of things, right? And the way it was communicated here was all of these three things, every bit of all of them. And when General Ibrahim came, he said, no, it starts in small pieces, right? And so the negotiating needs to begin in those small pieces and doesn't redefine the policy that doesn't exist.
Debra,
Okay.
can you explain who General Ibrahim is? Because it may be unclear to people. He's an official from Lebanon. How is he somebody in possession of information related to Syria?
Discuss what Ibrahim said specifically about the.
Who is he? Explain to people who he is, what his position is in Lebanon, and
Oh,
what
who?
that means with relation to his understanding of the situation in Syria.
Oh, okay. Well, he's the head of Lebanese security. He's been instrumental in getting hostages out for years. He's actually known for being able to do that. He's a tremendous negotiator. He has, very close ties in the region, especially with Syria. And so he knows how things work. He was the host that carried the Americans into Damascus. And so he's keenly aware of what was happening there, and was so concerned about the miscommunication that he made the trip to the United States in November to clarify. And he was just clarifying that the things that had been asked weren't in, entirety. Does that make sense? Yeah.
All right, does anybody have a question here? All right.
If you
Thank
could
you.
take your mask off and yell, that would be so helpful to me.
I'll do my best. I was just hoping you could, you said you've been in DC for 5 weeks now, meeting with officials, and I was hoping you could characterize who you've met with, and even if you haven't been able to meet with the president himself, have you been talking with officials at the White House about this?
I'm so sorry. I have a hearing deficit, and sorry.
No, let me try to ask it again. So you've said you've been in DC for 5 weeks now, and I wanted to know if you could characterize who you've met with and what you've been doing with those 5 weeks, and if you've been able to meet with anyone. I know you say you haven't met with President Biden. Have you been in discussions with anyone from the White House?
I have been in discussions. The thing about it is, our discussions are relevant and our discussions are productive, but they still have to be signed off by Jake Sullivan and ultimately, most likely, the president. And so not feeling confident that those levels are responding to Austin keeps me up at night. Having those discussions is hugely important because we can distill it down to something that is a very concise ask. But I want to know, especially after sending 3 letters to President Biden, one from a bicameral, bipartisan signatories of Congress, one which was signed by the CEOs of major print media, and one that was sent by the family. No response whatsoever. No indication that he ever even saw those letters. And so my concern, the meetings I'm having are relevant, they're important to me, I definitely want to keep that dialogue going, but I'm not here for chats. And they have to be approved. The things we're discussing have to go up the chain. Otherwise, we really are just having tea and crumpets.
All right, anyone else have questions? Yep.
Hello. You mentioned that Secretary Blinken had this Zoom call, I believe it was in February, with hostage families. And I was also told that Jake Sullivan had a Zoom call last Friday with families where many of them confronted him about requests for meetings that had gone unanswered. And he said that he was unaware that families had requested to meet with him, and that going forward, he pledged to meet with anybody who requested a meeting. I'm wondering if you have a response to that and whether you have directly requested a meeting with National Security Advisor Sullivan.
That statement, I will meet with you the next time you are in DC, which he said to all the families, made the whole hour worthwhile for me because this trip was already planned. So as soon as the Zoom call ended, I sent an email. Lovely, I'll be in town Monday.
And did you get a response?
I did.
And will you be meeting with him this week?
I hope so.
Any other questions from the audience? Bill.
Really great program. It'd be great if Christophe and Debra could take one more swing at trying to attach what we're doing in DC with this Summit for Democracy and the issue of press freedom. What is at risk for us globally as journalists when the message is that a nation can hold a reporter that goes into theater to send back images of the greatest humanitarian catastrophe since the Second World War, and he's stopped. He's stopped from doing that by being put in prison. And that's not just stopping his activity on the ground, it's stopping the receipt of the news from that region to the rest of the world, to Americans, and that's information we need for our democracy. I'd just like to hear from you guys on that, on the larger meaning of this, and it fits with today.
Maybe you go
Well,
first.
I mean, we like to think of ourselves as the leading democracy, right? I mean, I'm not sure if that's exactly correct, but you know, the founding fathers were the ones that said a free press was the foundation of democracy. So this is not a new concept. And the point that you made where we talk about a free press and protection of journalists and the ability of reporters to move about freely, even in conflict zones, with impunity for sure, you know, and protections, we all agree that that is important. And like you say, Austin's been 9 years and, let's see, almost 4 months detained, and the message has been, that's a shame, right? And so does that make other journalists vulnerable? Does it send any kind of protection message? I don't think so. I do think it puts them in jeopardy.
Clearly, and I think it was developed in the past few weeks, because at the beginning it was not the case, but the media, the question of the media, of journalism, is one of the priorities of the Summit for Democracy. And yesterday, at 6 a.m. in the morning, to adapt for Asia, there was an event and Secretary Blinken made an opening speech about media with Maria Ressa and Dmitry Muratov, the two Nobel Peace laureates. And it was an occasion to speak about different challenges. And what is new in this field for press freedom, for journalism, is that journalism is affected by so many different types of crises. Of course, when countries are at war, but also a geopolitical crisis with despotic regimes which want to take the lead and impose their anti-models, with a democratic crisis, with polarization, with a technological crisis, with these social networks. They may not kill journalists, but surely they kill journalism itself, and they contribute to the destruction of democracies. And an economic crisis for the media, and sometimes a crisis of trust. So that's a lot for journalism, and we have to work on all aspects: safety, freedom, and Austin does clearly embody this. And also, in the same time, about how do we work regarding the ecosystem. And we saw that yesterday Secretary Blinken mentioned in the beginning of his speech our statistics regarding the journalists currently in jail. In the program, there was also a New Deal for journalism, which this is a project that we have. So there are so many different things to be done to protect journalism in the future. But of course, we always have to start with the question of those who embody the ideals of journalism. And Austin is among them, and that's what makes it so important that he gets released. Beyond, of course,
Yep.
his own freedom and the situation of a whole family.
Thank you. Thank you. And, you know, aside from the journalism aspect, there is a family suffering, missing a son and a brother and an uncle and a grandson and a nephew. And, you know, Austin's friends being deprived of his huge personality. So, you know, it's not just journalism that suffers when Austin's detained. You know, it's our whole family. And it really doesn't hurt any less ever. Thank you.
I think Bill has one more question.
Hey, Debra, since the last time you were here, John Bolton has published a book about his time in office. And in that book, he speaks about the case of Austin and hostages. And it was revealing what he said. And we're here because Austin's not free. Do you have anything you want to say about what John Bolton said and in that book related to President Trump's administration's efforts to try to get Austin out and how that relates to former Secretary Pompeo?
How it relates to, I didn't hear the very last thing.
Well, I just don't know if people know what Bolton wrote. So maybe if you want to, I can say that in the book, Secretary Bolton talks about how he and Secretary Pompeo distracted the president when he would come into their offices and ask about Austin. That Bolton almost brags about the fact that they took Trump's attention away from that point. And we're here because Austin's not free. So there were efforts under the Trump administration to try to get him out. When you read that in John Bolton's book, were you surprised? And
I wasn't surprised because I knew that kind of thing was happening. And you remember when I had a press conference here and I alluded to that, but I didn't quite have the nerve to call them out by name. Now I regret that I didn't, because I think that if I had raised a ruckus about that happening when I knew about it, I do think the president would have would have responded to my making a big deal about it. So I hugely regret that. At the same time, it's only 2 sentences in that huge book, right? But the cut is all the way through this mother. Just to see that John Bolton would take leaving Austin Tice in Syria as a bragging point is disgusting. I mean, he was the national security advisor. He's working in cahoots with the Secretary of State to deceive the President of the United States. The President of the United States believes that when he says, I want you to get Austin Tice home, he's the President. He said it, you're going to do it. And I think he just didn't know how much deception was happening in his White House. And I do believe Trump was so incredibly determined to bring Austin Tice home. And the fact that these 2 people working under him and for him thwarted that. There are no words. There are no words. And it certainly should not be a bragging point for anyone.
Are there any, oh, sorry, Bill, do you need to go? Are any other questions from the audience that came up since? Oh, right. Then I would like to ask a few more questions since I know we have a little bit more time. You know, are there 1 or 2 things that you wish you could be done that you think would lead to the release of Austin? And what are those things?
I just wish that we could have, in a country of 320 million people, maybe 1 million people constantly calling out for the return of Austin, constantly asking, why isn't Austin home yet? That is something that I think would be hugely effective, even if it was only 500,000, you know. It has been really difficult, and I don't understand why, to create that kind of passion about the fact that Austin needs to come home. And Austin needs to walk free for a lot of reasons, a lot of good reasons. And there's no good reason to ignore the fact that he's been left. And is there anything else?
Maybe to build on this. When such a situation lasts long, time goes, people could, after a certain period, lose their energy and determination. And it should be exactly the contrary now. Because after 9 years, I think that every day there should be a sort of amplification of at least of the commitment of the journalistic community, as I mentioned. Because every day is not only another day, but we should now amplify, and we will do our best as Reporters Without Borders to do this in the next few weeks and months.
Right. I don't, you know, there was the thing about, well, we're journalists. What can we write? What's new? What's new? My answer is always the same. It's a new day. It's another day. It's news every day. Because everything is different. The sun came up again. And that's enough. That's enough to write about Austin. And I didn't look at the counter before I came upstairs, but we're getting close to 3,500 days, I believe. Yeah. 3,500 news stories, really.
This counter is really impactful. When I saw it, I was, so congratulations for doing this.
Thank you, Bill.
think we have time for just a couple more questions. Can you name people in the government who've been particularly helpful in this case? What would you like to say about them?
I can't name them. They're my heroes. I mean, we have an FBI agent that has broken all boundaries just by staying with Austin's case since 2014. Usually they rotate out in a little under 2 years, right? And then you're back to square one. And we get back to square one a lot because this country has an election every other week, it feels like. But yes, we have amazing people that have been relentless supporters, relentless advocates for us. And the only thing I can say publicly is you know who you are, and we would absolutely not want to be on this journey without you. We have had some amazing support, yes.
Can you highlight particular members of Congress who have been helpful?
I'm sorry, say it again?
Can you highlight particular members of Congress who have been helpful? too?
Yes, I can. Senator Cornyn is a hero of heroes. His office is, I feel like when they see my caller ID, they answer the phone, yes. What is it? Just amazing. Congressman Al Green is exactly the same way, checking in. I don't feel like I've done anything recently. What can I do? He's our congressman. So yes, we've had our senator and our congressman have just been beyond anything you could hope or imagine, especially in a state the size of Texas, you know. So yeah, that's been great. Thank you so much for reminding me and
Absolutely.
prompting me to say that, because I haven't had the opportunity to call them out, but they are truly amazing.
And with that, how can people who want to support Austin support him? Closing question.
What can people do to support Austin?
They can contribute to the communication by circulating information about Austin, updates on the social networks. They can go to the Austin Tice website and maybe connect with you, and then once they connect with you, we can find, according to who they are, what they can do. And everybody can do something for
Right,
Austin.
and I do forget about, I'm not terribly good about instant communication like Twitter. I did it for a while and it just gave me profound anxiety. But I know it's a big deal, and there's new names all the time like Instagram and, you know, things like that. If people would take a moment, if they're into those sites, that's hugely helpful to mention Austin in those kinds of formats, you know.
And they can also connect with the DC office of Reporters Without Borders, and we'll find a way so that they can help.
Yeah, there you go.
Just to add a challenge to that, and maybe I'm not a journalist, I'm a campaigner with Reporters Without Borders, so maybe a campaign challenge. Deborah, we were chatting about the Free Austin Tice banner that had been up at the museum for some years, which I understand was our US office had helped into getting that up, and how difficult it is actually to get anybody to host a banner like that. So I'll challenge if there's anybody in the district with the courage to display such a banner now that the museum has closed. The counter downstairs is indeed really powerful, Bill, so thank you for that. But I would love to see a Free Austin Tice banner somewhere really prominent in the district now that the museum can't host it anymore, that it serves as a visual reminder in a public place until Austin is freed. So if any news organization has the courage to do that, or others with prominent space, that would be amazing to see.
Wonderful. I think that's a great suggestion. I think we're out of time now, so I just wanted to thank the both of you for this conversation and for everyone here in the audience for listening in, and those also watching on the live stream. And I hope that we can just continue to keep up the interest in Austin, and we'll be here to continue to update everyone here on his case as well. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. And thank you all for coming so much.